Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving into a fascinating topic, evaluating AI agents within realistic scientific workflows. It's about moving beyond simple benchmarks and seeing how these systems perform in the messy, complex world of scientific discovery.
Yeah, exactly. It's the difference between training a model to recognize cats and dogs and having it design a new drug or discover a new exoplanet. We're talking about real-world impact here.
But it's also about understanding what realistic actually means. Are we just replicating current scientific practices, or are we aiming for something more transformative? Because simply automating flawed processes doesn't necessarily lead to better science.
That's a crucial point. What constitutes a meaningful workflow? Is it purely about efficiency, churning out more papers? Or is it about the quality of the research, the novelty of the insights, and the ability to connect disparate pieces of information in a new way?
Right, the metrics matter immensely. It's not just about speed. Consider a scenario in drug discovery. An AI could rapidly screen millions of compounds, but if it overlooks subtle interactions or produces results that are difficult to replicate experimentally, then the speed advantage is negated.
That reminds me of the AlphaFold example. It's amazing how accurately it predicts protein structures, but it's not a complete solution. Scientists still need to validate those structures experimentally, and they need to understand the underlying biophysics to design effective drugs that target those proteins. But it's a game changer, right? Think about how much time and resources are saved by having a good starting point.
Yes, and AlphaFold is still essentially a very sophisticated pattern matching system. It excels at predicting structure based on existing data, but it doesn't necessarily explain why a protein folds the way it does. A true scientific understanding requires a causal model, not just a predictive one. And that's where I think current deep learning approaches fall short. There's a lack of reasoning, a lack of true understanding.
I agree. AlphaFold is impressive, but it's still a brute force approach in many ways. It learns correlations from a massive dataset, but it doesn't necessarily understand the underlying physics. And that's why it can sometimes produce inaccurate predictions, especially for novel protein structures. It doesn't capture the spatiotemporal dynamics of protein folding. It's just a static snapshot.
So let's break down what we mean by scientific workflow. It's not just running simulations or analyzing data. It's about formulating hypotheses, designing experiments, interpreting results, and communicating findings. And crucially, it's about dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity. How can we design AI agents that can handle these multifaceted aspects of scientific work?
Well, I think the key is to expose these agents to more and more realistic data. Feed them everything: raw experimental data, published papers, conference presentations, even lab notebooks. The more data they have, the better they'll be at identifying patterns and making predictions. We are talking big data, truly enormous data sets. It's all about scaling up.
But that approach assumes that the data is clean and unbiased. In reality, scientific data is often noisy, incomplete, and riddled with errors. And published papers can be biased by publication bias, where negative results are less likely to be published. So, simply throwing more data at the problem isn't a guaranteed solution. We need algorithms that can explicitly reason about uncertainty and bias.
And also algorithms that can understand the context of the data. A single data point is meaningless without knowing where it came from, how it was measured, and what assumptions were made. The spatiotemporal context is critical. I'm thinking of things like sensor calibration, environmental conditions during the experiment, even the researcher's own biases. All of these factors can influence the results.
Yes, context is paramount. The agent needs to be able to understand the experimental setup, the limitations of the instruments, and the potential sources of error. And it needs to be able to communicate its reasoning clearly and transparently so that scientists can evaluate its conclusions. We have to be able to validate its train of thought.
But isn't that what explainable AI is trying to address? Techniques like attention mechanisms can highlight which parts of the input data the model is focusing on. And we can use methods like LIME and SHAP to understand how different features contribute to the model's predictions. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction.
Explainable AI is helpful, but it's often post hoc explanations that don't necessarily reflect the model's actual reasoning process. It's like trying to reverse engineer a black box. What we need are algorithms that are inherently interpretable, where the reasoning process is transparent from the outset. That's where neuro-symbolic approaches come in. They combine the strengths of neural networks with the power of symbolic reasoning.
Right, the why is so important. Even if the AI can tell us what inputs it focused on, we still don't know why it focused on those inputs. What underlying principles or assumptions is it using? And how does it relate those inputs to the overall problem? Current approaches feel like black magic sometimes.
I agree. It's crucial to move beyond just pattern recognition and prediction towards genuine understanding and explanation. Neuro-symbolic methods could offer a bridge, allowing us to encode prior knowledge and constraints into the model, while still leveraging the learning capabilities of neural networks. Think about using ontologies to represent scientific concepts and relationships, and then using neural networks to learn how those concepts interact in specific experimental contexts.
But aren't ontologies a bit rigid? Science is constantly evolving, and new discoveries are constantly overturning old assumptions. How can we build ontologies that are flexible enough to adapt to new knowledge? It sounds like we need to create an AI to maintain the AI.
That's a valid concern. Ontologies shouldn't be treated as fixed and immutable. They need to be constantly updated and refined based on new evidence. And that's where neural networks can play a role, by learning to identify inconsistencies and gaps in the ontology. It's a dynamic interplay between symbolic and subsymbolic reasoning.
And that's where the spatiotemporal aspect comes in again. Because scientific knowledge isn't just a collection of facts, it's a process of discovery. It's about observing phenomena, formulating hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, and refining our understanding over time. An AI agent needs to be able to track the evolution of scientific knowledge to understand how different theories have emerged and been refined in response to new evidence. How is the space of scientific knowledge being traversed?
Exactly. We need to think about how to represent scientific knowledge as a dynamic, evolving network of concepts and relationships. And we need to develop algorithms that can navigate that network, identify promising research directions, and even generate novel hypotheses. That requires understanding the historical context, the current state of the field, and the potential future directions.
So, it's about building AI agents that can essentially act as collaborators, working alongside human scientists to accelerate the pace of discovery, automating the routine tasks, identifying patterns in the data, and suggesting new experiments, but still leaving the critical thinking and the creative insights to the humans. At least for now.
I think the collaboration aspect is key. We shouldn't be aiming to replace scientists, but to augment their abilities, to provide them with tools that can help them to explore new ideas, to analyze complex data, and to make better decisions. But it requires trust, and that trust needs to be earned by demonstrating that these AI agents are reliable, transparent, and aligned with scientific values.
And also by ensuring that these AI agents are accountable. If an AI makes a mistake, we need to be able to understand why it made that mistake and to learn from it. We can't just treat them as black boxes that spit out answers. There needs to be a clear audit trail so that we can trace the reasoning process and identify any flaws in the algorithm or the data. How do we develop a scientific conscience?
Accountability is critical. We need to develop methods for verifying and validating the outputs of these AI agents. And we need to ensure that the training data is representative and unbiased. One area that's interesting is the use of spiking neural networks. They offer a potentially more biologically plausible model of computation, which could lead to more robust and adaptable AI systems.
Spiking neural networks are definitely interesting, but they're still relatively immature compared to deep learning. They require specialized hardware and training techniques, and they haven't yet demonstrated the same level of performance on complex tasks. But the potential is there, especially for low-power applications.
And they might offer a better way to integrate symbolic reasoning, because spiking neural networks can represent information in a more temporal and event-driven manner, which could make it easier to combine them with symbolic representations of knowledge. Imagine a system that uses spiking neural networks to process sensory input and then uses symbolic rules to reason about that input.
The temporal aspect is key, and not just in spiking neural networks. Any AI agent that's designed to operate in the real world needs to be able to reason about time and change. It needs to be able to predict the future, to plan actions, and to learn from its mistakes. And it needs to be able to do all of this in a way that's robust and adaptable to changing circumstances. The world is constantly evolving.
So what are some concrete examples of how we can evaluate AI agents in realistic scientific workflows? One approach is to use them to assist with literature reviews. An AI could automatically identify relevant papers, summarize their key findings, and even identify potential contradictions or inconsistencies. This could save scientists a huge amount of time and effort.
Absolutely. And it could also help to reduce bias. Because human scientists are often prone to confirmation bias, where they tend to focus on evidence that supports their existing beliefs. An AI could provide a more objective and comprehensive overview of the literature, highlighting all the relevant evidence, regardless of whether it supports or contradicts the scientist's hypothesis.
But we need to be careful about how we train these AI agents. If we train them on existing literature, they might simply perpetuate existing biases. We need to ensure that the training data is representative of the entire scientific literature, including negative results and unpublished data. And we need to develop methods for detecting and mitigating bias in the AI's outputs.
And we need to make sure that the AI is actually understanding the literature, not just memorizing it. It needs to be able to synthesize information from multiple sources, to identify underlying themes and patterns, and to generate novel insights. It's not enough to just regurgitate what's already been written. It needs to be able to contribute something new.
Another example is using AI to design experiments. An AI could automatically generate experimental protocols based on the available literature and the scientist's research goals. This could help to ensure that experiments are well designed and that they are likely to yield meaningful results. Again, huge time saver.
Yeah, and it could also help to optimize experimental parameters. An AI could use machine learning to identify the optimal settings for different variables, such as temperature, pressure, and concentration. This could lead to more efficient and effective experiments. Imagine optimizing the parameters for a chemical reaction to maximize yield.
But we need to be careful about blindly trusting the AI's recommendations. Experiments are often complex and unpredictable, and there may be factors that the AI is not aware of. It's important to validate the AI's recommendations experimentally and to use human judgment to interpret the results. You can't just automate the whole process.
And we need to make sure that the AI is designing experiments that are ethically sound. It needs to consider the potential risks and benefits of the experiment, and it needs to ensure that the experiment is conducted in a responsible and humane manner. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should.
Absolutely. And finally, we can use AI to analyze experimental data. An AI could automatically identify patterns and trends in the data, which could lead to new discoveries. This is where deep learning has already proven to be incredibly powerful, analyzing images, time series, and other complex data sets.
Right, it's revolutionizing fields like genomics and proteomics, where the amount of data is simply overwhelming for human scientists to analyze manually. And it's not just about finding correlations, it's about identifying causal relationships. An AI could use causal inference techniques to identify the underlying mechanisms that are driving the observed patterns.
But we need to be careful about drawing causal inferences from observational data. Correlation does not equal causation, and there may be confounding factors that are not accounted for. It's important to use experimental data to validate the AI's causal inferences and to use human judgment to interpret the results. It goes back to the collaboration point, right?
And we need to make sure that the AI is not overfitting the data. Overfitting occurs when the AI learns the noise in the data rather than the underlying signal. This can lead to inaccurate predictions and spurious discoveries. It's important to use techniques like cross-validation to prevent overfitting.
So what are some future research directions in this area? From my perspective, I'm really interested in exploring the use of spiking neural networks for scientific discovery. They offer a potentially more biologically plausible model of computation, which could lead to more robust and adaptable AI systems. And I'm also interested in developing methods for integrating symbolic reasoning with neural networks to create AI agents that can both learn from data and reason about knowledge. How can neuroplasticity principles guide the self-training of LLMs?
From my perspective, I think the key is to continue scaling up deep learning models and training them on ever larger datasets. The more data we have, the better these models will be at identifying patterns and making predictions. And I think we'll see further advancements in explainable AI, making it easier to understand and trust the decisions made by these AI agents. What new architectures can be used to better understand the nature of self-training?
I think we need to shift our focus away from purely data-driven approaches and towards more knowledge-driven approaches. We need to develop algorithms that can explicitly represent knowledge and reason about it. And I think we need to focus on developing neuro-symbolic algorithms that combine the strengths of neural networks with the power of symbolic reasoning. How can we define self-training that requires fewer assumptions?
From my perspective, the key is to develop AI agents that can understand the spatiotemporal structure of the world. They need to be able to reason about time and change, to predict the future, and to plan actions. And they need to be able to do all of this in a way that's robust and adaptable to changing circumstances. I think there's something fundamental missing in how we represent information and how we translate between different coordinate systems of representation. Can self-training bridge between different coordinate systems?
Those are all excellent points, and it highlights the multifaceted nature of this challenge. It's clear that there's no single silver bullet. We need a combination of approaches, drawing on insights from neuroscience, computer science, and philosophy to create AI agents that can truly augment and enhance scientific discovery.
Absolutely. And it's an incredibly exciting time to be working in this field. The pace of progress is breathtaking, and the potential for impact is enormous.
But we also need to be mindful of the ethical implications of this technology. We need to ensure that it's used responsibly and that it benefits all of humanity.
Indeed. As we move forward, it's essential to maintain a critical and open dialogue about the goals, methods, and potential consequences of AI in science.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Cognitive Spirals. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you found this discussion stimulating. Until next time, keep exploring.